It's just wonderful to be here in Australia. It's a country I love to visit every opportunity. So I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to present here. Oh, now, the theme for the conference is a celebration of reason, and creationism is what I usually talk about, so I thought I would try to combine reason and creationism, two terms that most of us here would think would sit rather uncomfortably next to each other. The dictionary defines reason as the mental powers concerned with forming conclusions, judgments, or inferences, and sound judgments, good sense. Well, as to sound judgment, reason and creationism don't seem to have a lot to do with each other. The inferences creationists make about the empirical world seem greatly inferior to those made by scientists. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. But first, just so you know what I'm talking about when I use the word creationism, let me explain. The rest of the talk will make a lot more sense. Special creationism is a Christian view that sees God creating things in essentially their present form. Whether stars and galaxies, or planets, or plants and animals, people, whatever. You are created in your present form. It is a point of view that is completely incompatible with evolution, unlike many other Christian views. There's two kinds of special creationism. Young Earth creationism is the most familiar. These are individuals who believe that the Earth is very young, and that the creation took place over 6 24-hour days. There also are old Earth creationists who have a slightly different perspective. They do accept geology, physics, and chemistry, but they choke on biology. They accept that the Earth and the universe is old, but most of them are actually progressive creationists who believe that God created sequentially through time. And that is a way that they maintain the special creation view, but still accept a fair amount of modern science. Now, the intelligent design folks overlap. They make so few fact claims, they really can't be put into one camp or another. But if you consider the concept of irreducible complexity, it really is a special creation concept. And I don't have time to go into that. But mostly what I'm going to be talking about today is young Earth creationism and intelligent design. And I'm going to use geology as my example. Now, the Grand Canyon is truly a wonder of the world. It's over 300 miles long. There are about 5,000 feet of sediments. It's layered like a cake, with the bottom layers being a little bit cockeyed there. An easy drive from Grand Canyon is a place called Zion Canyon, which has more sediment packed upon those 5,000 feet of Grand Canyon sediment. This is called the Grand Staircase of the Colorado Plateau. And an easy ride from Zion is Bryce Canyon, where you have additional sediments piled on top of those. And further up the Colorado Plateau, there are more sediments. So we're really talking about a lot of rock in the central and western part of the United States. Now, to explain Grand Canyon, standard science accepts the inferences made by Nicholas Steno back in the 1600s about literally the lay of the land. He had 3 insights that have shaped geological sciences ever since. The principle of horizontality, that geological layers form horizontally. So if you see layers tipped, like in the bottom of Grand Canyon, that occurred after they were laid. It gives you an idea that the Earth has had a history, which was extremely important to help us understand the history of the planet and ultimately the history of biological organisms on the planet itself. The principle of lateral continuity, that layers will extend in a horizontal fashion until they run into something that stops them, something solid. And perhaps from the standpoint of biological evolution, the principle of superposition, that the layers on the bottom are older than the layers on the top. These seem like very simple observations or inferences, really, but they were extremely important to the development of what became the geological sciences. Now, creationists accept these 3 Steno principles more or less, but they neglect to apply them when the implications of these principles fly against their ideology, such as the literal truth of the Bible. To young Earth creationists, the best way to refute evolution is to remove the possibility of enough time for evolution to take place. And because the entire Bible has to be literally true, Noah's flood must be an historical event. The consequence of this for geology is that all sedimentary deposits have to be catastrophically deposited by Noah's flood, including Grand Canyon. So the Colorado Plateau, in the view of creationists, all 5,000 feet of it, of the Grand Canyon sediments, and then of course several thousand feet thereafter, had to be laid down by the receding floodwaters. The basement rocks of Grand Canyon, the schists and granites, the tilted part, that actually is Creation Week, that's pre-flood. The early flood laid down Grand Canyon, which is the right-hand column there. And then you get into Zion and Bryce, and those are late flood and post-flood. It all is taking place within a period of a year. Now, one feature, yeah. It's too bad I don't have time to talk about continental zip, because that's another fun feature of continental drift is really accelerated in creation science as well as deposition. One feature of Grand Canyon that's very difficult for creationists to explain is the Coconino sandstone, which is this beautiful big white layer, in some cases thousands of feet thick. It's aeolian, it's wind lane. It's a big, huge sand dune that extends across a large portion of the North American continent. In Grand Canyon, the Coconino sandstone is sandwiched in between two layers of rock, which are, to all evidence, water lane. So you have a water lane, a layer, this is not easy to say, a wind lane layer, and another water lane layer above it. This is hard to do within a period of a few months. Now, creationists have to have Grand Canyon deposited catastrophically, though, so they've had to deal with the improbability, of this water, boy, that was pretty quick. Let's go back. They have to deal with the improbability of this water, wind, water kind of layer. And interestingly enough, they've tried to do some research to try to demonstrate why the Coconino could be water lane instead of wind lane. And this is kind of an interesting thing. There are tetrapod footprints found in the Coconino. And this, of course, also complicates the problem, because you have a water lane, a layer, you have the Coconino, and these little varmints scamper across, leaving the footprints, and then that's sealed in by a water lane. This is tough. So for creationists, because Coconino has to be laid down by water rather than air, they've been trying to persuade the scientific community of this for a number of years. And they actually have done some real research. Leonard Brand has conducted experiments with reptiles in a water tank to try to demonstrate that the kinds and shapes of the footprints that you find in Coconino could have been laid down by small tetrapods, four-legged land vertebrates that were sort of swimming, knocking into the surface, or close to the ground as the flood waters raised. And he's published several papers on this in scientific journals. But of course, it's only in the creationist journals that he mentions the implications that the water that allegedly laid down the Coconino was the water of Noah's flood. There's a number of reasons why that is not very likely, and why he has not persuaded other geologists that the Coconino is water lane. There's trackways that indicate galloping, which would be very hard to do underwater. There's also small arthropods like scorpions and spiders, which are not going to be leaving tracks underwater. So there's just a lot of evidence out there that is being ignored by the young Earth creationists in promoting this idea of a water lane Coconino. Now, one characteristic of fluid lane strata, whether water or wind, is cross-bedding, where sediment forms layers on the lee side of the dune. And geologists have ways of discriminating between water lane and wind lane crossbeds. And the conclusion of standard geology is that the Coconino clearly is aeolian in terms of many, many features of these cross-bedding. I'm getting encouraged here to hang on. Oh, that's entertaining. Well, let's see what we can do here. Well, something about, hey, tech guys, can you come here for just a second, please? Never mind, I think I figured it out. Never mind. I got it, thank you. I got a challenge to the Aeolian Deposition. I didn't do that. Based on the characteristics of the grains of sand of the Coconino Crossed Beds, cast doubts on the usual explanation. And this research was presented in a poster at the 2010 Geological Society of American meetings by students from Cedarville College, which is a Christian college in Ohio. And the kids, did all the right work. They took thin sections of the sandstone, they examined the grains, laboriously counted grains from each slide, counting them, evaluating them for characteristics of size, shape, and sorting, very standard procedures for data collection and analysis, and their paper was accepted at GSA and perfectly normal. And if you look at conclusion number 3, the sand might have been deposited in water, which would be something of a surprising conclusion for standard geology. Now, geologists haven't been convinced by the student work or Brand's work or anybody else. Again, there's a great deal of information out there that is not compatible with the idea of a water lane deposit. All of the other evidence indicates an Aeolian deposit, and so that is why geologists consider it. The biggest problem done with the science done by creation science proponents is that they fail to consider the refuting data, the refuting studies, the studies that refute their particular inferences. They seek out only the data that is compatible with their view, which is why even though what they do looks like science, it isn't actually a legitimate form of science. But ironically, the science done by creation science proponents actually has more to offer than the supposedly more sophisticated intelligent design science, so to speak. The efforts of ID proponents to present their case has been puny indeed. The very few published articles claimed to support ID actually only attempt to disprove some aspect of evolution, particularly the mechanism of natural selection in producing adaptive complexity. Their ID papers claim the improbability of some combination of mutations occurring to produce an enzyme system, for example. Thus, the feature has to be explained by intelligence, and of course, the intelligence is always God. Although the fact claims of creation science proponents are wrong, they actually make fact claims that potentially can be disproved and are disproved. They actually are trying to do some science, and even if they leave out some steps, I think they actually do better science than the intelligent design proponents. Intelligent design is stripped of fact claims and devolves to evolution can't do the job. So if creation science is wrong, in the words of Wolfgang Pauli, intelligent design is not even wrong. I thought it might be interesting, since we're talking about reason in this first sense, as a process of forming conclusions, judgments, or inferences, to compare evolution, creation science, and intelligent design on the story of the past. What is the historical narrative of these three views? What is the pattern that they see in the past? What is the process that they use to explain the historical narrative? And for evolution, the historical narrative, of course, is common ancestry. The pattern is a branching tree of life, and the process is natural selection, genetics, evo-devo, lots of other speciation, lots of other mechanisms that bring about this branching tree of life. Creation science has an historical narrative. It's special creation. God specially created things in their present form. That is a historical narrative. It happens to not be compatible with the vast majority of observations, but at least it's a fact claim that you can test. The pattern in creation science is variation within kinds, the created kinds of the Bible. And the process is God's intervention followed by microevolution. So God creates the kinds, and then you can have variation and evolution within the kind. You simply cannot have evolution from one kind to the other. So it is an internally coherent system. It just happens to be wrong. Intelligent design has no historical narrative. You will search the intelligent design literature for years and never find them saying anything about what happened. What did God do and when did he do it? Isn't in there. There is no pattern in the intelligent design perspective of the past. They never say anything about what happened in the past, what is the shape of the history of life, if life had a history at all. And the process you have to merely infer, and the process is God intervenes to create things like irreducibly complex structure, And then you can have microevolution. It's basically a special creation point of view, but in terms of science, it is much less acceptable, interestingly enough, than is our poor old creation science. But there's another way. So evolution clearly wins in the definition of reason that I began with. But there's another way of looking at reason and creationism that uses the word reason in another sense. Reason can also be defined as the basis or cause of something, as when we speak of the reason for doing something. A reason can be a statement explaining a belief or action. Viewed this way, of course, creationists have reasons for their beliefs. But the reasons rarely have much to do with other kinds of reasons, the kind reflecting empirical evidence and science. So let's take a look at reason and creationism from this direction. What is the reason creationists are so opposed to evolution? Well, for creation science proponents, the first reason concerns the fear of the loss of salvation, the fear of the loss of eternal life. The cartoon reflects the view of these Christians that unless Genesis is literally true, then there was no sin of Adam, thus there's no need for Jesus to die for our sins, thus there's no basis for Christianity. If Jesus didn't die for our sins, then there's no possibility of being reunited with God in the afterlife and being reunited, of course, with your loved ones, and that is very important to many people. A second reason is morality. The Bible is the source of everything good, whereas without the Bible you have only social disintegration, as in these two pillars from Answers in Genesis. Now remember, this is a religious tradition that rejects the idea that you can be good without God. I don't know about you, but I haven't killed anyone in weeks. Well, what about the intelligent design guys? Generally, they aren't biblical literalists. They don't base their Christianity in Genesis. The reason the intelligent design proponents reject evolution has more to do with an animosity toward the philosophical materialism they believe permeates modern culture. It's a culture war perspective. And they are the good guys defending society and a Christian worldview against materialist philosophy. To do this, they need to change how science is done. Let me explain. You see, from the very genesis of the primary intelligent design promoting institution, the Center for Science and Culture, which is associated with the Discovery Institute in Seattle. Originally, the Center for Science and Culture was the Center for Renewal of Science and Culture, which itself gives you a hint at their orientation of themselves as culture warriors. In the Discovery Institute Journal in 1996, Bruce Chapman, president of the DI, wrote, quote, "For over a century, Western science has been influenced by the idea that God is either dead or irrelevant. Two foundations recently awarded Discovery Institute nearly $1 million in grants to examine and confront this materialistic bias in science, law, and the humanities. The grants will be used to establish the Center for the Renewal of Science and Culture, led by Stephen Meyer here, which will award research fellowships to scholars, hold conferences, and disseminate research findings among opinion makers and the general public." The more you read about the program, and there will be about 6 books to read from in the center in the next 4 years, the more you will realize the radical assault it makes on the tired and depressing materialist culture and politics of our times, as well as the science behind them. Then when you start to ponder what society and politics might become under a sounder scientific dispensation, you will become truly inspired. I'd love to have time just to deconstruct the scientific dispensation being a term from Christian apologetics, but there's no time. To continue, Chapman goes on, "Accordingly, our Center for the Renewal of Science and Culture seeks to show that science supports the concept of design and meaning in the universe, and that design points to a knowable moral order." In their newsletter, let me just pull this up for you, the center seeks nothing less than the overthrow of materialism and its cultural legacies. And this paragraph here, the center explores how new developments in biology, physics, and cognitive science raise serious doubts about scientific materialism and have reopened the case for a broadly theistic understanding of nature. Now, what is this scientific materialism? This is a curious phrase. You don't usually hear this phrase in common everyday parlance and in newsletters for the general public. It has to do with two ways that the term materialism or naturalism is used. We talk in science about methodological materialism or methodological naturalism. This is a practice that scientists have where we restrict ourselves to explaining the natural world using natural causes. And the reason for that is that science is about testing explanations. And the common way that one tests explanations is that you hold constant variables that you're not as interested in, and then you can see what's happening and see whether your explanation works. The only variables you can hold constant are natural variables. So science restricts itself to natural causes. Whether or not the scientist is a believer or a non-believer, we all do science the same way. There also is something called philosophical materialism, which is the philosophy held by, I assume, most of us in this room, and my own personal philosophy as well. Philosophical materialism goes beyond saying you can explain the natural world through matter and energy, through material causes, to say that that's all there is. There is only matter, energy, and their interaction. The universe consists only of material factors. There is no God, there is no supernatural, just we're stuck with matter and energy. These two are not the same, but the intelligent design proponents regularly conflate them as a way of attacking science. Let me just look at this logically for you for a moment. I assume that it's perfectly reasonable that all philosophical materialists are methodological materialists. It would be very difficult to imagine a philosophical material who did not accept the idea that the natural world can be explained through natural causes. This seems pretty easy. But if, indeed, all philosophical materialists are methodological materialists, that does not mean that all methodological materialists are philosophical materialists. All M's are not P's. Okay? This is a logical error. Now, it might be empirically true. You can have something be logically wrong, but empirically true. If that, think about it, it does make sense. If philosophical and methodological materialism both occupied the same space, so to speak, then it would be true. But we know empirically that's not true. We know many methodological materialists who are believers. They are not philosophical materialists like you and I. Gregor Mendel on up, so to speak. But this is exactly the error that the intelligent design proponents make, and it is a very strong motivator for their attack upon science. In Philip Johnson's book, The Wedge of Truth, he talks about how the materialism of society is held up by the materialism of science. In other words, scientific materialism as described and as you heard in the Discovery Institute literature. The scientific materialism is undergirded by evolution as this very, very important scientific idea that is very important to society. It has great implications for philosophy, for as we've been talking about in this conference of ours. I don't think I need to explain that any further. Evolution is the science that deals most closely with the critical issues of who we are, where we came from, and where our responsibility lies. The wedge strategy that he outlined in this book is an attack upon evolution, because the view is that if you can destroy evolution, then that provides no foundation, if you will, for scientific materialism. Then you can attack the material basis of science. You can argue, as the intelligent design folks did during the Dover trial and elsewhere in their literature, that we have to open up science to let in the occasional miracle, let in the occasional hand of God, in origin science, as they call it. So if you can destroy scientific materialism, this, of course, will destroy societal materialism and leave it open to what, in their terms, a proper Christian theism. So attacking evolution is a means of attacking science as a means of constructing a proper Christian theism. Now, as it happens, the intelligent design proponents have not had much luck persuading the scientific community to abandon methodological naturalism. It works really well. We're going to stick with it. Considering the large amount of understanding of the natural world amassed through restricting ourselves to natural causes, and the lack of any improvement in that understanding derived from intelligent design, we have no reason to abandon the procedures that have paid off so well. Changing the way we do science to make room for intelligence is a really bad idea. Still, if we are looking for reasons why creation science and intelligent design proponents object to evolution, the reasons exist. And though they are different, in intelligent design versus creation science. To be successful in dealing with the challenge the creationists of any stripe pose to science education and to the public understanding of science, we need to know what the reasons are in order to determine the most effective ways to deal with them. Now, unfortunately, this is a brief half-hour talk. I've probably gotten there already, so I can't go into those details. But if I can only direct you to ncse.com, if you go to this news alerts button, you can get a free Friday electronic newsletter that my colleague Glenn Branch produces. It's very, very informative, very depressing, all the things that are going on in the creationism controversy. The news button will take you to this page where you can find out what's going on. I encourage you to sort for the state of Tennessee in the state pull-down menu. We've had quite an adventure there recently, and we are rather depressed about the outcome. You can sort by year as well. And we are a membership organization, so do consider joining us. And thank you so much for inviting me to participate in the conference. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Eugenie Scott. We do have some time for questions, though, Eugenie. You're not getting away that easy.
I'm happy. I just thought that was such a nice, thank you, Eugenie Scott, and off you go.
I was thanking you for the talk. Anyway, hello. If there are any questions, please find people with the blue T-shirts and microphones. There's one over here. Yes.
Hi, Eugenie. I'm a huge fan. First of all, I had to say that. But what do you think about religious scientists that, although they're not creationists, and sometimes they're really good advocates against creationism, they make their own sort of mistakes? In that, I was thinking of Kenneth R. Miller in his book Finding Darwin's God, and about page 234 or something, he goes and says, well, God may intervene at the quantum level, and I think that's quite disingenuous because, he's making a claim that is just basically based on faith.
Okay. I think a nice thing about Finding Darwin's God, Ken Miller's book, is that he separates off his science. And if you read the first 4 or 5 or 6, I forget how many chapters, he just absolutely lays waste to creation science and intelligent design. It's one of the best scientific put-downs there is. And then he says, and now I'm going to talk about my personal religious beliefs, and then he goes on to other stuff. I don't care so much about his personal religious beliefs. I'll let other Christians and atheists debate that. I don't care. What I care about is he does a really, really good job on the science, and that's the bottom line for me. I'll take allies wherever I'll get them.
There's a question up here, man in the grey shirt.
Thank you. Where are other religions?
Where's this person?
Up here.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed the talk. Where other religions talk about how the world came into being, what efforts are being made in those countries to sort of forensically go through the proofs and alternatives they put forward for the reasons why?
Well, countries in which the predominant religion is one of the Middle Eastern monotheisms, Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, which is a very large portion of the planet. Those countries regularly have difficulty with evolution because, of course, they're all based upon the same ultimate revealed truth. In Hindu countries, Shinto, other world religions, Buddhism, it's not a big deal. They don't care. And so the teaching of evolution isn't a big deal. Interestingly enough, though, in many parts of Europe, and as I learned when I went to Great Britain over the last 2-3 years, teachers are reporting a lot more pushback from students, Islamic students, who really don't want to hear about evolution. And one of the difficulties that we're finding in Great Britain, Charles Darwin's hometown, so to speak, is that even though the teachers are not anti-evolution, they don't have any, they don't reject the idea of evolution, they really don't understand the science very well. So when they get the Harun Yahya or other kinds of Islamic anti-evolution materials, they don't know how to deal with them. So there's this unfortunate tendency, just as, alas, class in the United States for some of the British teachers to just say, well, don't worry about that. We have so much to cover this semester, we're probably not going to get to evolution. So there's the same kind of self-censorship. The teacher just skips evolution, which is taking place elsewhere and then in the United States as well. So it's become more of a worldwide problem.
We have a question down here. Man in the yellow shirt.
Yes.
Oh, is that a volunteer? No, man in black shirt.
That's right.
Still early days.
With reference to the Dover trial, it seems that intelligent design is founded on willful dishonesty for legal benefit. If we do come across people who promote intelligent design, should we have a little bit of faith, I suppose, that they're not just being dishonest, that they actually believe these things? I mean, I know it's been called creationism in a cheap suit before.
Cheap tuxedo, I think, classically, but
That's the one, yeah.
I get asked periodically, well, do they really believe this stuff? And I have no reason to doubt that they are, that they firmly believe the intelligent design views or the creation science views or the old earth views. I don't think there's any doubt in their mind. The confirmation bias and the other sorts of psychological behaviors that we all fall prey to. You tend to listen to what reinforces your point of view. And that is something that we who are aware of it should be struggling against. But it's a very easy pattern to fall into. So it's very easy to skip all the information on the grain size of Coconino sandstone if what you want to show is that this is a water layer. So I don't think that the vast majority of people who hold these views are disingenuous or deliberately lying to us. I think they get things wrong a lot, but that's not the same thing as deliberately lying.
We have time for one more question. Up there, in the black t-shirt.
I'm getting better at this. I'm finding where the people are.
Yeah, me too.
Hi. Okay. As we know, science works on a peer-review based system. So, do you think that organizers of scientific conferences and journal editors have a responsibility for the fact that creation science and pseudoscience has managed to sneak its way into mainstream scientific journals? And do you think there's a problem with the peer review system that needs to be fixed?
I would say that the number of creations, I don't know of any creation science promoting articles that have gotten through the peer review process. And I actually did a study on that back in the 1980s, and I don't think there's been any improvement. There's been a couple of articles that have claimed to be support for idea that have gotten into the journals and almost immediately have been shown to have just been bad decisions in the peer review process because they were very shoddy science. But let me also point out that in the academic world, there is a sliding scale, so to speak, of scrutiny. The lowest common denominator, so to speak, are the scientific conferences, that if you belong to the association, you have a right to attend that association's meeting, and you have a right to submit an abstract to present a paper or a poster at that meeting. Now, I used to be a president of a professional society, a physical anthropologist, and so I'm very well aware of this process. Someone submits an abstract, it goes to an abstract review committee, which reviews it for, do you meet the criteria for an abstract as we have set up? This is the due process involved. If you do, you can give your paper. So at the physical anthropology meetings, we've had papers presented by people who really believe there is a Bigfoot. Okay. Now, I assure you, the rest of the physical anthropologists are not really convinced by this, information. But the meeting should be a place for letting 1,000 flowers bloom, so to speak. People ought to be able to if they can write a coherent abstract and whatever the criteria are for the abstract for that particular professional meeting, if they can meet those standards. For AAPA, it's basically, do you have a conclusion? It's not a high bar. We should have a lot of ideas popping up at the scientific conferences, because that's where you can really butt heads, you can really talk about things in the hallways, talk about things in the, before the poster, ask questions during the podium presentation, and you can really get your ideas out. Some of these crazy ideas that seem crazy now may really work and may help us understand nature better, but the only way we're going to find out is if we test them and if we have that exchange among scientists. Now, to get an article published in a peer-reviewed journal is a higher bar. You have to, you can't, it's not just having conclusions. You actually have to have a methodology that leads to the conclusions that you're presenting, and there's a lot of other things as well. So it's perfectly reasonable to have this layered series of levels of scrutiny. And I'm all for letting the creationist students at Cedarville College or any other creationists come to the geology meetings, the biology meetings, the physical anthropology meetings, and present their points of view if they have followed the rules, for getting an abstract submitted and accepted. And then we'll tell them why they're wrong. And that's the place to do it, not in the high school classroom and not at the school board level. If the intelligent design folks or the creation science folks want to convince a high school student that God poofed everything into existence and that evolution is crappy science, that's free speech, go for it, but don't do it, don't fight your culture wars on the back of the high school students. Convince the scientific community, and then it's going to trickle down to the high school, just like all other scientific ideas. But what they're doing is they're doing an end run around the normal process, because what they have is essentially a political position, not a scientific one.
Now, please thank Eugenie Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.